Welcome Exiles to the one caster to rule them all, the Blood Mage. This character has been in the works since League start, with humble beginnings growing day by day. The footage in front of you is to showcase a small insight to the progression, but if you really want a more thorough view, I streamed all my progress and you can check the live tab on YouTube for some raw progression, and as well as daily uploads I did showcasing snippets of the various progression points of the character. Now let's break down the key components that make this build tick. First, let's talk recovery. Undying Hate, a unique timeless jewel that drops from the Kulamak Abyss boss, gives you the ability to get the Sacrificed in Blood keystone. Now, this timeless jewel can have multiple names rolled on it. Tekrod is the one we care about. It can say Kulamak, Ulaman, Amamanus. You get the idea. It needs to say Tekrod. This is a 1 in 5 to divine, or you can just buy it off trade. Now, Tekrod indicates what keystone is going to be changed within the radius of the jewel. You need to socket it near a keystone, and when you socket it in, that keystone will change to Sacrifice in Blood. This keystone gives the ability to have insane sustain on the character. For every life you spend, over the next 8 seconds, you will get regen equivalent to the amount you spent. The key component here is this life regen rate is scalable. Investments into life regen rate, life recovery, more life regen from Arcane Surge all apply. So you can get 2 to 3x or even higher the amount of life you spend from just investing into some life recovery rate. What this means is you can end up with net thousands of life regen, feeling like you're basically immortal in terms of any sorts of degens. All of them you can ignore, and it just feels oh so good. Now let's talk damage. Wrathpith, a unique focus, provides spell damage and spell critical chance based on your total life scaling. More life equal more damage. Pretty simple, right? But it doesn't really stop there. You get more critical damage from the Ascendancy Gore Spike, more life, more crit chance, more spell damage, more crit damage. Multipliers on each other, that's good. And if you thought we were done, we aren't. GGG added a new support gem, Ataluis, which grants gain damage of physical based on how much life your skill costs, which ties back to Wrathpith. This gives an additional life cost of 6% based on your total life number. Normally this stat would be a downside, but for our character, it is literally pure upside. The more life cost equals gain more damage from an Ataluis, and more life cost also means more net life sustain from tech rods. We just keep getting stronger. Even the downsides help us. Importantly, all these stats we are getting from life are separate scaling vectors, which means they multiply together. The more life giving gain damage multiplies with crit bonus, multiplies with crit chance, multiplies with percent damage. It all just works. So what's one of the best ways to scale life? None other than the thickest life chest of them all, Kaoms Heart. Normally the downside of no spirit can feel pretty rough because of how many good spirit reservations there are. But for this character, quite frankly, there's not many good spirit reservations outside of like cast on crit, which doesn't really feel bad to lose considering when you get this much damage scaling that almost everything instantly falls over, it doesn't really feel like we need to have a cast on crit spell anyways. Now these items give us a high max hit, insane regen, and crazy damage, but what more could we possibly want? Well, me personally, I like the ability to be bad at the game, and Defiance of Destiny gives me exactly that. No matter how many times I sprint a heavy stun, I will not learn, and Defiance completely sustains all of that damage that came to my character due to my own lack of skill. The key stat of this amulet is recover percentage of your missing life before incoming damage. This stat effectively gives some level of infinite survivability if the enemy's damaging hits are not large enough. For example, my character with 7,000 life, if I were to get chipped down all the way to 1 HP, I had 1 HP left, I'm at my weakest point. With a 20% Defiance of Destiny roll, I will recover 1,400 life from Defiance before the enemy hit registers, and with Blood Mage Pseudoprogenesis node, this is the equivalent of having almost 2,000 HP, which is similar to most softcore characters. They get to about 2k HP on most builds. So as you can see, there's some pretty big benefits to this amulet in terms of survivability. Even when you're at your lowest point of sustain, like say you run a less recovery rate map, this amulet will sustain you from enemy hits by itself. So it just makes perfect sense, I kind of think, and it feels very good. The key components, Wrathpith plus the Ataluis support gem, magical damage scaling, a Defiance for basically if any amount of shotgunning hits come in, we will survive. Combine that all with the Tech Rods Jewel, all the life you spend, you get net sustain from. This just is insane recovery. Basically, I don't know what degens are. When you play this character, you're going to realize degens don't matter so much, except for the small scenario where there's one monster that can literally just turn off your recovery. One of the Abyss mobs, I think, can do it. That you'll regularly run into, which you will notice. But for the most part, degens are not a thing. And then, of course, you tie that all together with life scaling. And what does life scaling the best? Kaoms Heart. So that gives you the core scaling for the character, the core concepts. Cutting in real quick so I don't forget to go over it. We do have the written guide done. Took me forever, but it's here. It has all the various information you could want or need about the character. Going over gear, passives, progression, you name it. It goes over it. Took me forever to get done, but I did get it done. So now, if you don't want to listen to me describe the build, you can read the build and not have to watch this video. I've also updated the planner. I tried to simplify it a bit in terms of the gear progression and the gem link snapshots and whatnot. So hopefully you guys enjoy that. Now let's get back to the rest of the video. Now I want to go over, and we're going to have timestamps below with various sections of things I'm going to go over in the character. We're going to go off first with League starting the character and work our way through the progression of the build. So League starting the character, quite frankly, elemental skills kind of suck. They're not very strong in the early acts, and they don't really catch up damage scaling until, I want to say, Act 4, Act 5-ish range, or interlude range, is when the elemental skills start to catch up, when they get some more tools in their toolbox to make them work. And quite frankly, the damage numbers early on are just not balanced well. They're just way too low damage compared to other options. So I recommend starting with Essence Strain of Contagion. So if you go through and you look at either the build guide tree here, which you can expand like this, or you can look at the tree on the planner, it starts out with a low level Essence Drain tree, just going straight percent damage into up to about Act 2 to 3, where you're grabbing percent damage scaling. Now, this in between here and here, there is a big tree change that occurs, which is mostly a respec. Basically what you want to do is you want to start grabbing relevant travel nodes to get over to this area. And then around mid Act 4 is when you're going to be changing from an Essence Drain build into a Ember Fusillade Fireball build, or at least that's what I did. You can go for other skills because they do have some generic scaling, but I'd recommend Ember Fusillade plus Fireball, as Ember Fusillade's very good single target and Fireball's very good clear. They worked quite well, and they give you that peak aesthetics with the Blackflame Keystone. So that's the idea. Act 2 to 3, Essence Drain should carry you through. And then as you're progressing towards middle of Act 4, start grabbing these travel nodes, getting ready to do this respec here, where you're going to grab a lot of percent damage, some crit scaling, and you're going to swap over to a Blood Mage. The key component that will occur here is you're going to change from Progenesis node to crit node when you swap to fire skills. You can also start as a Lich and go for the 30% more damage node and the mana regen node. That's what I did on League Start. But you can also just start as a Blood Mage and go straight for Leech and Progenesis. That will work well, as those are nice defensive nodes. So keep that in mind. So that's the start. That's the initial swap in terms of leveling and passives. Now, in terms of skill gem supports and sustaining mana, what you will notice is initially when you do that swap, Essence Drain was very low mana cost, whereas a lot of these elemental skills like Ember Fusillade Fireball have a lot higher mana cost to them. It's going to be like, okay, we did this swap, now we have a mana problem. So part of solving that is either A, you invest into more mana regen and mana on gear, which will just naturally sustain you. B, you invest into mana remnants. There's a reservation, as well as things like arcane remnants, which will help the sustain as well, or these cost efficiency nodes. Those are also an option. Or C, you go for the Mask of the Sanguimancer. This unique helmet that gives blood magic will then make all of your skills cost life instead of mana. Now, the key component here is when you have blood magic plus blood mage, this node right here, you actually get double the cost as life, because it doesn't just get rid of this base cost you're gaining based on your mana cost. It gives you both the mana cost as life from blood magic and the blood mage's life cost from this node here. So your skills are actually going to be decently expensive at a baseline. And so the key to that, in not having your character just spend your life down to 0 all the time, is A, make sure you get a decent amount of life on your gear, so that way you have a decent life pool. But B, you need to make sure you're taking advantage of the leech node properly. For example, when enemies or bosses are like spawning in, they're not targetable. If you're just spending a bunch of life preloading, you're going to be at a low HP pool. They might spawn in and just one-shot you. So you need to make sure you're spending life when you can actually hit enemies to then leech back life. If you're spending it all when enemies are untargetable or undamageable and you can't leech off them, it's going to be a bit awkward. Number two is I have a recoup flask right now, but before I had this unique flask, I had a life flask that had 30% applies instantly. What this ends up doing is it gets you out of like panic situations where you can't initially leech off something. Let's say you're sprinting from one side of a zone to another side of a zone, and at some point you get heavy stunned, you get knocked down, a bunch of enemies jump on you, you don't have any leech going out because you're heavy stunned, you're not sending out spells to hit enemies to leech off of. In those moments, you can panic slam the instant flask for recovery to then get out of the heavy stun and then attack the enemies and still be able to cast spells. So that's some of the main things I would say is make sure you get life on your gear. Make sure you are playing around the fact you need to be able to leech off enemies to sustain your life pool. Stuff like that matters quite a bit for your initial gameplay of the character in not spending too much because that initial life cost is quite high. So that's talking about the transition of passives and gearing. Once you're at a comfortable point, progressing with life and mana costs solved and not having too much issues there, it really just comes down to getting your damage filled out. You'll notice on these trees between 72, 80, 85, 91, what ends up happening in most of these trees is we're all in this same area. Like, it's not like we're expanding to a different part of the tree. We're mostly just grabbing either A, quality of life through things like cast speed, or B, straight up damage from all of these really strong crit nodes that are close by to our character. So it's a matter of, okay, we did this initial swap. Now we're going to take advantage of all these really strong nodes that are close by to our character. And that's what this is in this progression is. Eventually, you'll get to the point where you're saying, okay, I've progressed a lot. I've made a decent amount of currency. That's when you're considering investing into a Kaoms, Wrathpith, Ataluis, those sorts of items, the key components of the build. And that's when you consider the Kaoms tree. Now, this Kaoms tree is giving up things like the monk area in order to go down to blood magic and get crit multi and reduce skill effect duration, which makes the Ember Fusillade feel better. It's got some nice quality of life to it, and it's investing into these life regenerate scaling things of Arcane Surge. You can also go for blood transfusion here as well to then scale the Tech Rod's regen. Now, this stuff is a pretty good situation, and I was quite happy with this tree. But ultimately, I have to say, when you start pushing those higher levels and you start getting some pretty decent gear, I would consider looking at one of these endgame variations, specifically because of, I gotta be honest, the biggest sell point for me was crystallized immunities. There's just something that feels oh so good about chill immunity. This tree ends up having more sustain and more damage. It actually has competitive damage because you pick up additional jewel sockets, which give you more crit bonus, which makes up for the damage loss of giving up some of this other crit bonus. It actually works out pathing wise. And then you pick up movement speed and life on this node, chill immunity here. And I have to say, it feels really, really good. Now you'll notice there's 3 endgame trees here. One is the Fusillade tree. One is the non-Fusillade tree. Like if you just want to play a different spell skill besides Fusillade, the primary difference here is you're dropping the reduced skill effect duration here and here, as you can see between these 2 trees. You should notice that the skill effect duration is being removed. Skill effect duration, quite frankly, does not matter all that much if you're playing skills that don't have, guess that, a skill effect duration tag. One example or counterexample of this would be if you're playing Spark, then you care about grabbing these nodes. So there's a little bit of customization that needs to happen if you want to play a specialized skill that has some specific unique mechanics like skill effect duration from Spark, like Fusillade with you needing reduced duration to make the shots go off faster. But ultimately, that you can make your own decisions on. Now, as for the Omnicaster, if you're wondering what this weird, slightly different tree is, what this is for is, given the example, if you want to go just full max damage, part of the way you do that is a big DPS +3 or +4 amulet. And I decided with this tree to counterbalance the loss of Defiance, I would add in some energy shields. So you'll notice between these two trees, there's a couple of things that change. Number one is I swap sides here so we can get access to pure energy. I pick up Potent Barrier, and I invest into a bit more ES. If you check the Omni gear on the planner or on the build guide, it's investing a bit more into percentage ES scaling. We then put on a Adziri's Defiance, and then we grab Zealot's Oath. The idea here is you're getting a massive amount of sustain from life regen from tech rods. Why not take advantage of that with Zealot's Oath and have it recover your ES pool? And then the way you get a big ES pool is just having Adziri's Disdain. You're already scaling all this life. You put on Adziri's Disdain, and all of a sudden you have a 6k, 5k ES pool on a character with basically no ES gear pieces because you have so much life. And you get a bit of percent ES on here, and your amulet. So like, for example, if I wanted to showcase that real quickly, that would be on the +3 amulet gear set. It has pretty much the same gear as the Defiance and Calm sets, but it swaps out the amulet and it swaps out Disdain. So that way you get ES from Disdain and you get a bunch of damage from an plus level amulet. So that's the idea there. So that covers most of the tree progression. Let's get into mechanics of the build, specifically Ember Fusillade. There was a patch about 5 days in that changed Ember Fusillade from always being the correct targeting of an enemy to now, whenever you proc a wild charge proc, it will shoot in a spiral, which basically misses a bunch of damage. How do you fix this? It's quite simple. You need to recast and not get a wild charge proc in order to overwrite the targeting behavior. Because the game says, if most recent cast was wild charge, shoot in spiral. So let's try to showcase this real quick. Boom, spiral. Not ideal when you get a spiral. However, you can overwrite this targeting where you get a wild charge proc. See if I can illustrate this real quick. If you get a wild charge proc and then you cast again after it, notice how there was a wild charge proc there and I overwrote the targeting. Basically, it's the game just checks, was your most recent cast a wild charge proc? If not, then cast normally. If it is wild charge, shoot in circle. So a simple way you can think about it is the wild charge proc will always say 1 if your most recent cast was a wild charge proc. So for example, you're going to do single target and you really want to overwrite the targeting. You can say, look at this number. And if I see that it was a wild charge proc, if I see it was number 1, instead I will cast another time to make this count go to 2. If I see anything that isn't 1 here, that means my most recent cast wasn't a wild charge. So let me try to scale some of my life recovery so I can show this. If I stop on anything that isn't a 1, you'll notice it just shoots straight. Like I'll get a wild charge proc, but if I see a 1 there, I know I just need to cast another time and let that counter go to 2 or anything that isn't 1, and it won't be a wild charge proc. Ultimately, wild charge is like a 20%, normally about a 20% chance to occur. So the likelihood if you get a wild charge proc, if you cast again, the likelihood you're going to overwrite with the correct targeting behavior, it's going to work like 80% of the time. So personally, what I would say is if you see yourself proc a wild charge, just make sure you cast 1 extra time on there and it, for the most part, will overwrite the targeting. I generally just kind of was like spammy, and then I would go fireball, wild shards, or for example, if you see it start shooting a spiral, just cast again. Because you can interrupt the Ember Fusillade shooting out if you just cast again, if it starts shooting a spiral, and then you'll retain those projectiles to then have it shoot straight. Now, obviously, I got a couple wild shards in a row there, but if you're paying attention, you see it start shooting out, like doing that rotation pattern, just cast again, and then it'll correct the shooting behavior to actually target the boss correctly. Okay, that's the wild shards mechanics. Ultimately, if you really do not like the wild charge behavior, I still think it's worth using. But if you don't like it, you can always swap Scion's Temper out for either a multi-shot 2, or you can just go pure damage on your support and go for something like considered casting, Fire Master. You can go for pure single target supports. That is your call. So there's your options. Do with those what you will. I personally still like Wildshard and Silence Temper when playing with it because it just feels, in my opinion, very consistent, very good, but you can make that decision for yourself. Now, as for Fireball and Infusions, the way this skill works is it normally just has a single projectile that blows up on explosion, which is decent. It's pretty good for clear. You combine that with Fork, most of the time it'll feel pretty good for clearing packs. However, if you want to blow up the entire screen and you want to see some absolutely massive aesthetic things going on, you need Fire Infusions. What Fire Infusions do is they make the fireball not only blow up, but shoot out additional projectiles, which give you more hits, which is where you see those clips of me just clearing the entire screen. That's an infused fireball. The way you can get these is, I would recommend one of two methods. If you're really early on in progression, I would do Living Bomb, self-casting it on monsters. And what that means is when you self-cast Living Bomb on a monster and then you go kill that monster, that Living Bomb will blow up and it'll give a Fire Infusion, which means your next fireball cast will be big explosion, chain reacting projectiles, that sort of thing. Option number two is when you get a little bit more progressed and you get a Spellslinger wand, you can automate this process. I prefer Snap in this scenario. What Snap does is it says if there's ignited enemies, you cast Snap and it'll do this chain explosion on those enemies. I like it on Spellslinger because it gives you some instantaneous proc where it'll just pop all of them all at once. You can choose to do Living Bomb here as well if you'd prefer that, but that's up to you. I like Snap. Either way, you need to generate infusions somewhere in order to give that extra, basically, explosion of extra projectiles from Fireball, and that's how you get the infusions. It's either Snap or Living Bomb. So usually I just use Snap when I see a dense pack of monsters and I have my initial Fusillade cast, and then I shoot out a Fireball, and then I press Snap and it'll blow up the ignites on the enemies, and then it'll give a bunch of fire infusions, and I'll cast Fireball more, and then it'll boosh, that sort of thing. Hopefully that makes sense. So yeah, that's some of the breakdown of your two main skills that I use in this build. The only other thing you need to worry about in terms of skill usage is your curse and your sigil. All these other skills that you see on the planner, all these are for is just for meeting gem requirements. So real quick, why there are gem requirements is it's when you swap your tree and you grab these nodes here and here. Gem Enthusiast, percent life based on having 10 red supports. 5% movement speed based on having 10 green supports. What I did is I went through and I bought some of the cheapest 6 links on trade, and then I just chucked in random supports that made me meet the requirements to get 5% movement speed and 5% life. That's what this is for. And then for the other one here, crystallized immunities, I just needed to make sure my highest gem count was blue so I could get chill immunity. So that's why we have these extra skills here. Otherwise, they don't matter. And then the other skills are Enfeeble and Sigil of Power. Use Despair until you start doing life scaling with Ataluis and Wrathpith, because initially most of your damage is chaos from the fire to chaos conversion. But then late game, once your physical starts to just completely outnumber your chaos, for example, you'll notice physical says 35 to 70k and my chaos says 6 to 9k. You can see the fizz just completely dwarfs it. At that point, Despair is not as efficient of a DPS multiplier, and I'd recommend doing something like Enfeeble for just pure extra tank. So that's why I have that there. And then Sigil of Power. This skill says, as you spend mana, will ramp stages. The fun thing is, it works with blood magic. Based on the wording, I wouldn't think it is because it says mana, but it very clearly works with blood magic, and it gives quite a bit of damage. You'll notice our tooltip says 2.6, whereas we walk off 1.6. Okay, so what this is for is just you're spawning in a boss, pop down your sigil, do some casts, ramp it up. It's max ramped once you see that animation pop on the eye in the middle, and you can clearly see it's giving like 60% more damage or whatever it is. It's very, very strong. The main thing is you just need a chiming staff with plus levels, cast speed, and that's about it. I just would buy a cheap chiming staff with some okay cast speed, and then slam a perfect essence of sorcery to guarantee +5 all spells on there, and that will give you some nice DPS scaling. Also, quality does affect the radius on this thing, so make sure you quality it, otherwise the circle on your sigil will be a lot smaller and won't give you as much room to play in terms of walking around and having safe locations you can walk to while still having damage from the sigil. Now that we've covered skill gems, passive tree, let's talk a bit more about gear, because you might be wondering, Lance, I can't afford a Wrathpith. Is this build playable? Whatever will I do? Don't worry, don't sweat it. Yes, you can play this build with just rare gear. If you looked at the opening clips of this video, for example, the day 2 portion of the video, that's when I was still on all rare gear, and I think I was on a 5 link at that point. I didn't even have a 6 link. I was playing this character and it was doing really well, and that's because rare gear is insanely strong. What I recommend is use the weighted sum searches in the planner description using the better trading extension, or just shop around for yourself. But the point is, you can go and grab some rare gear, like for example, a focus with gem levels and cast speed, a chest that promotes crimson power. Instead of gore spike, have crimson power, or just get a high ES chest piece. 900 ES, I don't think it's too expensive at this point in the league. Go for just a rare belt with life and res. It makes your res capping way easier. A lot of that stuff will still get you a very powerful result. That's what I started with myself, and it worked quite well. And then use that to then farm up to the use uniques, which enable this very powerful combination. Outside of the uniques, in terms of gear priorities, is cast speed on rings with life and res if you can get it, and then some level of rarity always helps your drops. Outside of that, on helmet, it's all about life and res. On gloves, it's about life and res, and if you can get it, the horror mod socket effect allows you to get a lot of cast speed on your gloves. Can recommend that. Arcane Surge effect also helps a ton with sustain, because you can proc Arcane Surge via these nodes right here. They give chance to grant Arcane Surge on crit. Now, granted, this current tree does not have Arcane Surge. Some of my other setups do, so depends what you're going for, what your current setup is. Right now, I'm in between swapping some trees around to showcase Ember Fusillade. So right now, that stat's actually useless, funny enough. And then for wands, it's all about plus levels. +5, fire is really good, gain damage is good, percent spell damage is good, cast speed's good, crit chance is good. What's not good is something like percent fire damage. We convert all of our damage to chaos and then gain fizz. Percent fire does nothing for either of those things. So a little bit of a unintuitive thing. If you've come from PoE 1, normally you think, oh, this stat was what it was at baseline, so it applies even though it got converted. No, in PoE 2, it's only about what's the stat at the end. So it may start out as fire, but it ended as chaos after the conversion. Therefore, it doesn't care about percent fire. It only cares about percent chaos. Stuff like that's a little bit weird, a little bit different if you're coming from PoE 1, but just keep that in mind. And then for boots, movement speed, and life. I have a crafting video, I believe, on wands, boots, and amulets if you want to go for a plus level amulet, showcasing good ways to craft those. But that's the sort of stats that matter. It's really just about life, cap res, cast speed where you can get it, and gem levels. That's pretty much it. Of course, movement speed on boots is... I didn't mention that, but that should be a no-brainer. And then if you're talking about really min-maxy stuff, does it make or break the build? You'll notice I have a Headhunter, I have Rite of Passage, I have Fall of the Axe. I would say all these sorts of things, like these items, what they are doing is they are promoting quality of life. They do not in any way make the character work or not work in terms of like destroying endgame content. Headhunter means while I map, I occasionally get a movement speed buff, which is very nice, which is why I think it's one of the best belt slots. There's not really many good belt slots, so it's like it doesn't have much competition. I wish there were more competition in the belt slot, but quite frankly, a bit of extra movement speed is premium, and Headhunter gives it. Rite of Passage gives you 20% life after you've killed a rare and 20% DR. This is a really nice tank talisman, but ultimately the times it makes you die versus not die should be relatively small. For the most part, it shouldn't be the difference whether or not your character's living or dying. It only probably matters at the top end where you start going 30% delirious with full map mod effect with a bunch of damage multipliers. That's when this will come into play and make a difference. But for the most part, it shouldn't make a difference. And then Fall of the Axe. This is a, hey, here's some onslaught. That's pretty much what's going on with these charms here. Not your primary investments. Make sure you go for getting the key uniques and other rares first. These are good quality life upgrades when you can afford to do them, but you don't need to do them in terms of making a character work or not work. Hopefully I'm making some level of sense here in terms of like what you should be putting your currency into. There's a lot of good things to go to before you start going for these niche quality of life upgrades, which they are very nice for mapping. Don't get me wrong, but in terms of do they make the character function or not? Absolutely no. You do not need these to make the character work and destroy a lot of content. And I was playing without them for the vast majority of my playthrough. So yeah, anyways, that should cover gear. That should cover gems. That should cover passive tree, investment. Hopefully I've covered everything pretty well in the written guide as well. For those of you who like this sort of thing, I finally have it done and I will link to it in the description below. I have updated the planner, hopefully for what will be the last time, the final updates. But if there are things that people say, hey, you're missing this, or there's something you forgot to do, I will of course change that if there's something I'm forgetting. But I tried to simplify the planner out. I got the written guide done, and hopefully you guys like the build. This character's been honestly a lot of fun, and quite frankly, I think it's stronger than Archmage was in 0.1. You know, we did the Spark Stormweaver in the 0.1 patch, and that character was absolutely insane, and GGG destroyed it the next patch because it was pretty unbalanced. It was pretty OP. I would say Blood Mage is stronger than that character was, so I think I'd play it while you can this patch because I'm not sure it's going to survive next patch. I would bet on them nerfing this build. We will see. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Take care and peace out. Have a good one.